to the Delingpole with me, James Delingpole, and I'm very excited about this week's guest. His name is Robert Jackman. He writes for the Spectator, among other publications, and he's a young person. I mean, he's going to give me the lowdown on how young people... I'm sounding like Prince Charles now, aren't I? How the young are coping with this lockdown. Rob, welcome to the Delingpole.
Thanks. Sorry, the intro threw me because I have grey hair. I mean, I'm younger than some guests, but I'm not Generation Y or anything like that. But
well, how old are you?
I'm just over 30. I won't tell you the second number, but yeah.
I still consider that a young. Okay, right.
That's fine. Yeah.
You're right. You're not fresh out of uni.
No, I'm not.
Do you know what?
I just act like it, you know.
When I met you in the Spectator offices, I genuinely thought you were about, I don't know, 25. But I suppose it's a function of the fact that when you get past a certain age, all the bloody young people look the same. They really do. They look kind of naive and unformed and disgustingly free of care and free of wrinkles, and you just envy them there. What you imagine to be their fulfilled, rich, exciting lives. But maybe that's not the case. I mean, I have to say...
But I think we're all... That's how I feel. I see younger people and I think the same thing. And I was saying to a friend the other day, like, I've now got to that phase in your life where if you watch sort of Premier League football or something like that, they all look young. And when you're a kid, you watch football and they're adults. And you suddenly realise you've hit that point where, you're quite a bit older than most of them.
Wait till you get to the stage, Rob, when young women stop looking at you. They look, I mean, not they ever did particularly, but when they completely blank you, you don't actually exist. They look through you. It's like being a ghost.
Okay.
And that's
I
kind
shall
of
look forward to that.
That's kind of freaky.
Yeah.
All sorts
I think at the moment
carry on.
I'm probably going to turn 40 in lockdown if this current pace continues anyway. So, I think it doesn't really matter so much, does it, when we're all trapped indoors?
No. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about, which you let slip before we started recording this,
I did.
Was that you were a Remainer in Brexit.
I was.
It all seems so long ago.
And I wasn't... It does. And then, I sort of left it behind on the 24th of June or whatever. I was never FBPE. I never did a second referendum march or anything like that. But, yeah, I voted Remain. I sort of never really changed my mind that wasn't the best course. But, there'd been a referendum. So I was one of few... I was sort of on staff for about 18 months at the Spectator, and I was sort of one of the only Remainers there, I think. But I'm also, as I said when I spoke to you earlier, I'm also a lockdown skeptic. Or cynic, perhaps. I don't know. But, and I think those two tribes don't always go together. So I'm suddenly finding myself nodding along to people like Nigel Farage. I'm doing some work with Toby. I've always enjoyed your writing because I find you funny. But, a lot of it I've disagreed with. And now it's suddenly, it's nice to have kind of, political kinship.
I didn't know you disagreed with me. I don't like people who disagree with me. That's wrong. How could an intelligent person disagree with me?
I don't know. I've got a theory on you. I think there are two James Delingpoles because I read some stuff that you read in the, your excellent television reviews for The Spectator. I read the things you write about people like Grace and Perry. And then I think there's the James Delingpole that writes in Breitbart, who's probably the one I disagree with. But, that's kind of...
Oh, okay. Yeah, but I mean, we are the same person. And I suppose what I find, actually, since you've taken me down that alley, is that I notice this on Twitter a lot. In fact, I notice it in comments below the line on blogs and stuff as well, is that when people disagree with an ideological point you make, for example, the fact that I'm pro Donald Trump, say, or I'm a climate change skeptic, is that rather than address your ideological position, demonstrating why actually you're wrong to be a fan of Donald Trump and giving examples of why he's a bad thing, a ditto climate, what they do instead is that they attack your style, or they say that you're shrill, or they go for the ad hom rather than the argument.
Yeah, and I mean this this is what I'm getting on Facebook at the moment. I post about why I don't think the lockdown should continue in its current form. And sort of acquaintances will just openly say, "Oh, you're just kind of spouting right-wing propaganda. You're selfish. You want people to die." And it's really difficult sometimes just to have a conversation with these people and just to kind of acknowledge, look, these are the facts. Let's discuss what the facts are. Let's not jump straight to these kind of grand moral interpretations.
Yes. Well, there must have come a point where because I think at the beginning we were all a bit confused about where we should stand on this issue, weren't we? I think probably we all went through a stage where we thought, well, this virus coming out of China is frightening, and something needs to be done. What was the turning point for you?
That's a good question, because I remember there was that week when everything got really scary, and it started to resemble, the Russell T Davies Doctor Who, when they'd bring on that newsreader and they'd say, oh, this is breaking out. It started to feel like that, didn't it? Every time you turned on the news, the numbers were going up, and then Rishi Sunak was doing the bailout, and you thought, crikey, this is pretty serious. But I don't know. I felt something, when Boris came on television, looked straight down the camera and said, look, you need to stay at home. I don't know. I think that just set something off in me, my inner teenager.
Yes.
And I just felt, actually, I don't think this is right. I'm not looking. They'd shut the bars, they'd shut the theatres, they'd shut the cinemas. Everyone was cowering inside anyway. And I thought, there's not much I could do even if I wanted to. I'm not looking to go out and hug people in Trafalgar Square or whatever. But I just felt, why am I being told effectively that I cannot do anything?
Yes.
In case the worst happens, and I felt, you know what it's like at the Spectator. There's a lot of people that know Boris well, and they always say, look, he loves freedom, and you've got all these sort of stories about how, there used to be a sign outside the Spectator office, didn't they, saying no bikes should be parked here, and apparently he used to relish kind of chaining his bike up to that. He's always kind of liked breaking these petty rules, and yeah, the night he came on television, I just felt something about this doesn't feel right. And I went for a walk the next day, I went for a walk immediately, pretty much after the lockdown announcement, and it just felt quite chilling. There were police cars slowly patrolling around central London. You sort of felt that if you were outside, everyone was suspicious of you. The few people that were outside were wearing masks, and they were carrying on like there was mustard gas in the air, that, they could double over at any minute. Everything was shut down. It was really quite scary. And I went for a walk because I live in central London. I walked through Soho the next morning, and it was pretty sunny. And there were so many police around, and you just felt, if I stop moving for a second, I'll be quizzed as to what I'm doing. And, I don't know what it is, but I've got a few friends that feel the same, and they're not terribly political. And one thing I think I've got in common with it, I grew up in Norfolk, small town. I got to London as soon as I can. And one of my friends who feels the same way about lockdown, he's a Kiwi, he's a New Zealander. And I think there's something about, we chose the busy life. We actively moved to London, because we wanted to be able to meet people, to socialise, to have drinks. I've got relatives that pretty much live in self-isolation anyway. That's how old people live in Norfolk. That's how some young people live, to be honest. But, so I think it's that I chose this life. Like, I came to London to be free and to have fun. And, I'm not saying, look, I should still be able to go to Wetherspoons. Well, maybe I should now. But I just felt like a dog being brushed the wrong way, I think, when I heard that announcement. I was like, something about this is not right.
Your bullshit detector just it sensed something was off. And do you know what?
Yeah. Just
going back to I think that point you've made about lots of Spectator people knowing Boris. I mean, I know Boris. I've known him since our university days. And I remember, I think, was it 2 years ago, at the Spectator party? Oh, that time where it seemed like his aspirations to be Prime Minister had been knocked back for the final time. He'd been sort of brushed aside by the kind of Conservative hierarchy, and he had that little boy lost stroke hangdog look that he has sometimes.
Yeah.
And the Fawn and I found him in a corner of the park. Well, obviously people all still wanted to talk to him, but he was definitely not the man of the moment, and he was looking sad. And we came over and consoled him and said, "There, Boris, it's all going to be okay." So I'm fond of him because he has an aspect of his personality, and I'm sure this is what girls find so attractive. I mean, apart from his kind of blonde hair and stuff, and his kind of that sort of weird virility he has. This sort of that sense of, I don't want to be disgusting here, but just spunk waiting to burst out of him. And apparently he's always been like that. I mean, apparently somebody said he never had to have a wank from mid-teens onwards because he's always had available sex.
He said that, I think. This is a quote that's come up in one of his old columns. I've sort of seen it floating around Twitter. I think I've muted it. I'd rather not read it. But yeah, I've seen it around.
I agree. One doesn't want to read it, but nevertheless, it is there now in people's heads, and I've put it there, and there it is. There's no escape from it. But I was listening to an interview. Peter Hitchens was on the Mike Graham show on Talk Radio.
Yeah.
And Mike Graham made this rather similar point about Boris. He said, but everyone knows that Boris is really reluctant to have this authoritarianism. He just doesn't like it. He feels very uncomfortable with it. He's a libertarian. And Hitchens made the killer point, well, if he feels that way, why doesn't he stop it? It's this idea that, actually, this is another example of this. Have you ever read Vasily Grossman's Life and Fate?
I have not.
It's the kind of 20th century War and Peace, and it's set in the Soviet Union during the Second World War. And Stalin appears as this character off camera, so to speak. So Stalin is a presence. I don't think you ever actually meet him, but you see the effects of his tyranny on this community of intellectuals and scientists in Moscow during the war. And as yet another relative is carted off to the Gulag, what they always say is, if only Comrade Stalin knew about this, if he knew what was going on, he would be appalled. If only we could get a message for him to show him the terrible things that are being done in his name, which he'd disapprove of. I rather feel that, not that I'm comparing Boris with Stalin exactly, but I rather feel that same way, that he's being given this free pass. Ultimately it's his name on the desk. He's the boss. The buck stops with him. And if he can't stop this lunacy happening, then whose responsibility is it? He's the Prime Minister.
He is. And I think, what worries me though is this is popular. As you know, it's most people don't see this the way we do. And I don't know if you get the Politico Playbook email. It's one of these sort of very good emails about what's going on in Westminster. But they had a section in there the other day about how pretty much every day in Downing Street, you have the Vote Leave team presenting graphs, really detailed stuff, polling public opinion, and it just consistently shows that people support this thing. Particularly the kind of people that Boris brought on board in December to win the election.
Yes.
It's really popular amongst the working class. It's really popular amongst, in the north, in the red wall seats. And I was out of London actually a few weeks ago, and, some of my family, they're sort of Brexiteers. They vote Brexit Party, they vote Conservative, they like Nigel Farage. And I try to sound them out. And I think, people of that background, they're very difficult to predict which way they're going to fall on this.
Yes.
They're just as likely to be the sort of, Piers Morgan kind of hardline communitarians as they are to be, your sort of Daniel Hannan freedom types. I think maybe it's probably 75-25. And that's what really worries me, because I think, I do think this is a mess and we're stuck in this situation potentially for a long time. But it's not a mess electorally.
Yes.
This could really benefit the Conservatives, but it goes back to that old thing. And we're going to sound like, lefties having it. But what is the point of having political power if you do the wrong things with it? Pragmatism, ideology and all of that. And, the other thing that worries me, I think, is the way he's probably looking at this. This is a chance to brand the Tories as the party of the NHS for a generation.
Heaven help us.
And if you remember, if you remember back in November, October, when they were gunning for the election, the only voices in Cabinet that said, let's not go for a general election are the ones that cited the NHS. And they said, it's winter, the NHS is on people's minds, this could swing it for Labour. For years this has been seen as the Tories'
Yeah.
Achilles heel. It's one of the very few issues where they're electorally vulnerable. He's probably thinking, look, get this right, and we will be the party of the NHS. We will be forever associated with the NHS and clapping for the NHS and all of that sort of stuff, and we'll be massively in debt. We'll have we'll have lots of problems, but we will be the party of the NHS. And you just wonder, is that a price worth paying? Because but I can see how that would be persuasive if you're in Downing Street. You want to be there as long as you can. You want to win elections. You've now got a competent Labour leader to go up against, so you're no longer just up against the Corbyn clique.
Yes.
And I think he's seeing this as a chance to kind of, there are electoral benefits. And this is the problem,
It's such an epic problem. Funnily enough, I was having a conversation with one of my old friends, Quentin Letts, who is, old school political hand. He's been reporting on Parliament since we were young journalists. He did the parliamentary sketch when he was in his early 20s. So that would be 30 years ago, 35 years ago. And he was explaining the situation to me from the perspective of somebody who's interested in politics, which I'm not really, by the way. And he said to me that the rumour is that Boris fully understands that what a mess that he's got himself into, and he would like to dig the country out of this mess, but he cannot effect change while the populace thinks the way it does, and that this was the reason for the messaging of his rather lackluster speech on Sunday night, where he was talking, where the government changed its messaging from stay at home, save lives,
stay alert now, isn't it?
Yes. Stay alert. So there was a subtle shift, and it was from the notion that government was telling you what to do for the burden of how to behave to being placed on the individual.
Yeah.
And I think, and to a degree that's happening. To a degree, they have been clever there.
Yeah.
Because we're seeing it now, aren't we?
Yeah.
We're seeing people are starting to, those who want to push the boat out and risk, well, I don't consider it a risk at all, but to go out into the world more, are feeling empowered by this new move. But going back to Quentin's point, I don't like politics. I don't like the idea that politics is the art of the possible. I believe that politics should be about doing the right thing. And it seems to me that the quadrumvirate and the broader cabinet seem to have made the same political calculation that previous disastrous governments have made, which is basically this. We are prepared to let the economy just go down in flames so long as we win the next election. That's what, so long as we can carry on our reputation that we've earned recently as the party of the NHS, and when you cut us in half, you will find NHS like a stick of rock. That's what we care about, and the economy can go hang, or rather, the economy is a secondary consideration. Now that appalls me as somebody who believes in, well, somebody A, who's an ideologue, and B, believes in free markets, free speech, a free country.
Yeah. But I think it's now seen as very wonkish. It's seen as very nerdy to talk about the economy.
Really?
And we've had this in foreign policy. I think so, and I think, you look at someone like Christian Niemitz.
Yes.
And he's sort of stood alone several times, even on the Brexit debate. And I'm not just trying to be a sort of sulky Remainer or EEA type here, but, I think we've got used to just dismissing the economy, as seeing it as, and I always remember that story. I think it was Anand Menon. He was doing some sort of focus group on the EU, and it was in the run-up to the referendum. And he was talking about the potential hit on GDP and what did voters think of that. And one of them said, look, it's not my GDP. I don't feel the economy. It's become very removed from that. And I think, look, there's some legitimacy there. As the FTSE goes up and down, most people in the red wall seats don't feel that effect in their daily lives, but they will feel this. We're looking, I think, at a severe debt for the next, 10, 15 years?
Oh, yeah. That is just.
And
I'm currently in.
it's scary.
Burying my head under the pillow, make bad stuff go away, mummy, and hoping that when I wake up in the morning it will all have gone. Yes, when you say 10 or 15 years, my
Yes.
God, that is frightening. Um, so okay, so we've got these. We've seen this ourselves. This red wall. These people that, well, in my case anyway, I was championing as the real voice of Britain, the kind of common sense voice of Britain, the backbone. People who understand that
Yeah.
that British sovereignty is much more important than allowing ourselves to have rules made for us by this supranational, corrupt, sclerotic state across the pond. Yada yada yada. These people have gone from heroes to zeros in my eyes, because they seem to be missing a fairly obvious point, that the economy isn't just billionaires in top hats smoking cigars and having expensive houses while the rest of us can't get on the property ladder. The economy is everything. The economy, not least, is the ability of the welfare state to bankroll these people's lifestyle in some cases, and in others to enable them to have functioning businesses.
Yeah. And I think it's not just the economy. I mean, I think the thing that scares me is just how little discussion there is about the moral value of freedom in itself. You know, a few weeks ago, we'd effectively criminalised going outside, and you had people talking about phoning their neighbours and reporting people to the police. You know, you were having people moved on in parks for sitting down on a bench. And I think, even leaving the economy aside, they're just, apart from a few voices, you know, Jonathan Sumption was very good on this, the former Supreme Court judge. You know, there really didn't seem to be a sense that people should be free to make responsible decisions. And by all means, you know, nudge them towards making those decisions. Like, you look at what's going on in Sweden. They are social distancing. They are shielding older people. But you can still go to a restaurant. You can still meet in groups of 50, I think, which is quite a lot. I mean, you can still go to churches and things like that. People should be free to exercise some moral discretion.
Yes. Well, I agree.
And the decision seemed to be that, no, we can't have that. This situation is too important that you cannot be relied upon to make your own decision.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you seem to think more like a policy wonk than I do, or at least you understand that strain of thinking. So what you seem to be suggesting is that, okay, the economy doesn't play that well with focus groups because people can't really relate to it, even though, of course, it affects every aspect of their lives. But that is the stupidity, the product of generations of dumbing down in our education system, and of course having a left-wing media and having the BBC and so on. So people don't understand free markets or anything. But at the same time, you're suggesting that maybe people would be receptive to a message about the importance of individual autonomy, of being able to make decisions about our own lives and how to do the right thing, and that maybe this is the message that the government should have been pushing, or at least their nudge department should have been pushing. So why haven't they done it?
I don't know. I think they opted for the lockdown when they did because the numbers were so grave, you know, and I think there was probably an honest perception that if you didn't do this, we'd be in serious trouble. And I think...
Well, wait, the theoretical numbers look scary.
Yeah, you know...
We're not talking about real numbers.
No. And there's since been doubt cast on that, but even leaving that aside, I think the thing is, though, when they took on, when they went into lockdown, they effectively took on the impetus. You know, whatever happens next is their decision. And I think, the government it was decisive, but it wasn't effective. They very quickly said, look, we're just going to pretty much nationalise the whole payroll. We're going to ask everyone to stay at home.
Yes.
And you think, yes, that's decisive, but is it effective? And what do you do now? It's a bit like, the philosophical dilemma, the trolley problem. And the whole thing is we don't like, where you've got the, if you pull the lever, the trolley will go down the other route and it will kill fewer people.
Yes.
But it will be your choice where it goes, And I think what that problem shows is we don't like making these choices. We don't like it when the impetus is on us because all of a sudden you feel callous and you feel guilty. And I think by putting us in the lockdown, they put us in a situation where it's now up to the government to make the next step.
Right. Yes.
and they're not they're really scared about taking that next step.
Yes. I mean,
And it's extending as of default, which isn't right. I was trying to explain this to my mum why I feel so frustrated about it. And we were told that we need the lockdown to flatten the curve and to protect the NHS, right?
yes.
That seems to have been achieved, but it's continued. And it made me think years ago when I worked in a think tank, I had a boss and a colleague left, and the boss said, "Oh, you're going to temporarily take on 50% their responsibility until we recruit again. You won't get a pay rise because things are tight at the moment, but don't worry, we'll recruit soon, and you can hand off all that responsibility." Then they recruited, and it's like, well, actually, this person has a different skill set, so we want you to keep doing what you're doing, and it's just that sense of, look, we've been cheated here. We went along with this because we wanted to stop the NHS being overrun like it was in Italy. And then it gets extended, and you just sort of feel that, I don't know, do you not feel tricked? Like there's an element of sort of school discipline about this, isn't there? It's like we went along with this because we consented to the premise. The premise has now changed, but there's been no grown-up discussion as to what comes next.
Yes, I think it's called mission creep, isn't it? We see it again and again from government.
Exactly.
We saw it in Afghanistan. Do you remember originally we were going there? I think to protect girls. I think to protect the rights of girls and something, which was always and then I think it got confused with things like the opium produced there, and all manner of reasons were advanced. It's changed all the time to. I suppose it's a version of the sunk cost fallacy that we're in there now. So we just make up reasons as and when to justify this mistake we've made.
Yeah,
that's the thing.
It's changing.
I feel like we're paying the price for their initial mistake, and they're punishing us for their bad decision.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an element of truth in that. But one thing I will say, I mean, ever since this kicked off, I've been going for multiple walks. I've been meeting friends at weekends. I think I've been sensible. But I've been a bit of a lockdown breaker.
Yes,
and
tell me.
Well, my perspective was, you make a bet in life, and my bet was that I have a very small flat in central London.
Yeah.
And it's quite high rent, but I was happy to be there because I can walk to work, I can go to the theatre in the evening, I can be at any London airport in 45 minutes, and I thought, well, you don't need a big flat because you're going to be out in the evening with friends, at galleries, at bars, and then all of a sudden, everything like that shuts down, and you realise, well, what am I left with? I'm left with a very small flat in an empty street in central London, and I just found the situation really difficult. And luckily I've got a few friends that feel the same way. So we would just meet for drinks at weekends, maybe 3 or 4 of us. And the first time I did it, maybe this is in my head, because remember, this is at the height of the lockdown, so maybe I was being paranoid. But the first time I did it, you really felt that you could get arrested if the police, saw you with a bag of wine going to a friend's house. And when my friend came here, I would leave my door on the latch so he wouldn't have to knock at the door. I'd just say, text me when you're 2 minutes away, the door will be on the latch, you walk in as if it's your own house. And you suddenly realise that you're sneaking around so as not to attract the attention of neighbours or law enforcement or anything like that. And, there was just this kind of really dark 10 days when you felt, I'm not really living in a liberal democracy anymore.
Yes.
And, at the same time, it was quite nice just to sort of raise the glass with someone, but then, even then, we thought this was going to be over in 10 days. We thought we'll be out of lockdown soon, and then it's carried on. And it's funny because, I've got a lot of close friends that I reached out to and said, look, would you like to meet for a drink? And they just said, no, absolutely not. And some of these are people, some of them people actually, they're sort of right-wing, libertarian-leaning.
Really?
And I was saying to you earlier, there's a big difference between people that walk the walk and talk the talk. Because I'm not looking to break this for the sake of it, and if they're happy and content sitting in their flats on House Party app, whatever, fair enough, And I listen to Peter Hitchens, and he always says, well, look, I'm not going to go out and break this thing because I'm fundamentally a law-abiding citizen, but it's a bad law. But I was prepared to break it. And I think the ways that you break it are never really going to add to the transmission chain. Every time you go in the supermarket, you have an interaction with 1 or 2 people, don't you? So, you think if you just see one or two people at the weekend, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe someone with a big science brain amongst your special friends will write in and explain why I was actually being really reckless. But I just took the calculation. I thought, look, 99.9% of people are following this thing. If I do what I need to do to kind of stay sane, stay happy, it really isn't a big problem. And, the other thing is, you look at the people on social media that were saying, stay indoors, save lives. So many people I know in London had just cleared off to the country to live with their families
Yes.
in, big rural houses. Now, I could have done that, but I've got elderly relatives, and I thought, actually, I'm in good health. I thought I will stay in London. I'll stay in the plague pit. At the time, of course, it was the kind of corona capital of the UK. We're not anymore. We've been usurped. But, I stayed here because I thought it would be unethical to take the virus with me and go to rural Norfolk. So I kind of felt I'd sort of done my bit in a way. And that if I saw some other, 20, 30-somethings at the weekend, it was hardly the end of the world. But some people felt very differently. I gave some anonymous quotes to a newspaper. I was, they were doing a piece on people that were breaking the lockdown.
Yeah.
And I gave them about 800 words, and they paid it for me. They published it without my name on it, which I was actually quite happy with, because you got to be careful with these things. And I went on there the other day and I read the comments, and it was just people saying this guy should be executed, this guy should be paraded on television. If he gets corona, good riddance. And I just, you and I know, like people morph into a sort of slightly demonic version of themselves on the internet sometimes. But is that really how people feel?
So was this in
that someone that meets?
Was this in the Mail that you wrote this piece?
No, it was another newspaper. So you sometimes see it on Twitter where people say, "I'm looking for case studies. I'm doing a feature about," and someone had said, I'm doing a feature about people that are still socialising," and I sort of DM'd them and I said, "Look, I can give you some stuff," and immediately I didn't even think of this. They just said, "Oh, it can be anonymous, by the way," and I was like, "Well, here you go." Everything I told them was true.
Yeah.
I gave them about 600 words. They mashed it up. Obviously they zoom in on the quotes that make you sound a little bit more reckless, but that's fair enough. That's that's the game we play. But the below the line reaction, it was just nasty. And I'm a pretty I'm a theatre critic, interviewer at the Spectator. I don't get involved in polemical stuff, so I'm not used to that. And I was reading these comments below the line. I was just like, Jesus, people are angry out there.
Yeah, welcome to my world. Well,
yeah, I know. Well, that's the thing. I've had an insight into what it's like to kind of... and that's not even putting my name to something. You probably think I'm being a bit limp complaining about it here.
Well, the thing is, I'm always getting into trouble from my wife and children for saying stuff that I think is, well, it's kind of normal. Every normal person thinks this stuff, and then discovering that no, not every normal person thinks this stuff, that it's really quite out there. I suppose the classic example of this was when I went on the record about having for the Isabel Oakeshott biography of Dave, for Call Me Dave, and I talked about about my happy memories of smoking dope, listening to Supertramp albums with Dave Cameron at Oxford. And Isabel said to me, "No, you sure you want to go on the record with this?" And I was thinking, well, it happened. It was true, and I don't think, it's not like everyone smokes these days anyway, and it's not a big deal. And I think it just makes Dave come across as more human and likable, frankly. So what's the harm in it? And then I remember when the book came out and it was serialized in the Mail, and on the front page of the Mail it said, "And this journalist is Delingpole is the first person to go on the record as having taken drugs with the Prime Minister." And I was thinking, I don't really recognise this scenario. What's happened is that somebody has told a rather sweet anecdote about something that happened a long, long time ago, and it's being turned into this. It's being sort of written in block capitals, as it were, and it's shrieking at you, "This is a scandalous thing," and here we are declaring it to be a scandalous thing by putting it on the front page of the newspaper. So anyway, I'm always getting myself into trouble because I think that telling the truth should never be considered a bad thing, and I think people should do it more often, and I think the world would be a better place if they did. And
we should, you will think this as well, but we should be more tolerant of people's right to hold different views. You look at things. If you're in a workplace and someone holds a religious or social view that you just cannot make head nor tail of, and if it doesn't affect you, why does it matter? And I think, you know, we're getting to that point actually where people do expect some level of like ideological safety and comfort when they go to work.
Yeah. I mean,
And it depends, you know, if someone believes in a batshit conspiracy theory, that could affect their ability to do the job, right? You know, if they genuinely think, you know, but
well, I
if they
don't know
oppose
actually.
gay marriage or this or that, you know, why does it matter? I mean, yeah.
It's interesting. You're showing your colours there. I cannot think of a batshit conspiracy theory which would render anyone unsuitable for doing a job. I think people tend to compartmentalize.
Right.
What do you? Just come up with a batshit conspiracy theory that would stop someone being a programmer, say software programmer.
Yeah.
I can't think.
I think they're on the top of my head at the moment because I'm thinking about just popping by that anti-lockdown protest that's happening in London in a few days' time and maybe reporting on that. But
yes.
no, but when you look
where
into
is it?
It's in Hyde Park, I think, and there are rumours it's going to be broken up by police. But when you look into it, these people, you know, they're anti-lockdown, but for the wrong reasons. They think that this is some kind of big vaccination thing. You know, they think Bill Gates is involved. They think George Soros is involved. They think Israel's involved. They think it's about 5G.
How do you know that the Bill Gates story isn't accurate?
I know it's Occam's razor, isn't it? Though it's like David Aranovich writes this book in his book on conspiracy theories, where he says you will never beat a 9/11 conspiracy theorist in a debate because they will have read more about 9/11 than you ever will. But they will have read it with, you know.
I went on a panel. Oh, sorry, not a panel. When I've got a sort of soft spot for David Aranovich. I like him as a person anyway.
Yeah.
When his book came out, I did a sort of an interview chat type thing with him at the Foreign Correspondents Club, whatever it's called. You know, the one in West London.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
And
Frontline, isn't it?
What? Yeah, the Frontline Club. And what put me off the book was that he actually brands as conspiracy theorists people who are skeptical about climate change. And I'm thinking, well, actually, no, it's not a conspiracy theory. It's a fact. So I'm very wary of. Again, I think you're showing your colours there, and as you did in your earlier remark about the idea that there were two me's, the kind of the charming, literate kind of writer about culture. But when you think that actually it's cost me my job at the Spectator, it's a bit of a sore point.
Well,
really.
we are.
You know, I don't have.
You and I are now back page boys at the Spectator. We write for Igor in the arts section. You know, which is.
Well, I always had the job on the art section. That was my first job, the TV column. But then I had the me column, which is of course a more of a coveted thing. When you're free to write out whatever you like, but I suppose I'm balking at this distinction that you make. I think that my writing is of a piece. Some of it is political, some of it's not. But it's all kind of considered. It's not there for me to be a shock jock.
No.
And again, I feel the same way about the conspiracy theories. I'm not sure that they are. And actually, this demo, I think, is a necessary thing. And I don't really care whether it's organised for the wrong reasons. It seems to me actually it's de facto a good thing because it's, for whatever reason, it's protesting against the lockdown.
Yeah.
Which is a view we share.
Yeah, because I mean, I've been thinking about these protests they've got in the US. You know, like a lot of stuff that goes on in the US, it's presented in such a caricatured way in our media. But, you know, you've got these, you know, guys with guns protesting in Michigan, isn't it?
Yeah, I love them. Yeah, they dismissed as rednecks, but they're heroes.
Yeah, I mean, I spent time with those guys about 2 years ago when they were the 3% movement. You know, and they were the sort of pro-gun, pro-free speech, broadly sort of anti-government militia. I spent time with about three of them, like three groups of them in Kentucky, in Kansas, in California. And, I've been thinking about it a lot lately because I think, firstly, I sort of owe them an apology because they kind of said to me, oh, you know, UK government, it could turn tyrannical at any time and, you know, your freedoms could be taken away and this is why you need guns. And, I was just like, no, look, it won't happen. It won't happen. And, I was very kind of slightly, I guess, snobbish about it. And now I think if I ever see them, I've actually got two of them on Facebook, I should drop them a line and say, look, I'm sorry, you know, you were right. It's not a malevolent thing that's happened here, but, you know, we've just seen the population basically consent to its freedoms being completely discarded, I think, in a way that, you know, and when you look at these guys protesting in America, they've picked up on that.
Yes.
And we probably don't agree with their tactics. The thing that you always hear is heavily armed demonstrators. And I was saying to a friend of mine the other day, when you've met these people, they're heavily armed when they go to the garden centre. Like, that's a separate debate. They carry their guns around all the time. But what I really don't agree with is when they're getting in the face of the elected officials, when they're shouting at people, when they're banging on the door, they're demanding, I just see that as bad manners. But I think what they have picked up on is that something really serious is going on, in terms of freedoms. I don't know if you saw the Supreme Court in Wisconsin yesterday.
Tell me.
Where they actually struck down the extension of the lockdown. So the governor had extended the lockdown, just like's happened here. It was a 4-week lockdown to flatten the curve. The governor then sort of unilaterally extended it. The state Supreme Court ruled that he didn't have the power to do that. And I think, that's what these people tend to believe in, checks and balances and limited power. And, I've met a lot of people on the kind of gun-toting American right that I disagree with on a lot of stuff. But you know what? They always understand freedom. They always understand free speech. And I think there's something quite commendable about that. They're not cosmopolitan. They're not polite. They'll say terrible things about Muslims. But you know what? They probably haven't seen a Muslim in their life. But, they do understand what it means to be free.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
Because this is my plan. After all this, I'm planning to pitch a travel book, basically, called American Freedoms after this, where I'm going to go back and spend time in America with different groups that are kind of defining what it means to be free. Because I think, this has just made me realise that a lot of people in this country don't think about what it means to be free. And there's so many interesting movements in America. Like, I don't know if you've heard of the Right to Try movement.
To try what?
The terminally ill people. Well, they're terminally ill, and they want the right to try drugs that have not been FDA approved. So, this is really relevant with these treatments that you've been talking about for the coronavirus. And basically their take is, look, it's my body, my choice, the old kind of slightly lefty phrase. They basically say, look, I'm dying anyway. I want the right to use non-FDA approved drugs, and I'm happy to provide my data and all of this. But in several states, they're not allowed to do that because those drugs, or it might even be the whole country, but, they're not allowed because those drugs have not been approved by the federal authorities. So, there's all of these different groups in America that are essentially kind of pushing what it means to be free as an individual. And, my plan after all this is over is basically just to try do a book profiling sort of 8 different groups who are pushing for freedoms. Freedoms we might not particularly understand. I mean, I've never met a Brit that would want to own a gun. Right?
Yes, me.
I mean, you probably would, right?
Me. I absolutely think we should have a Second Amendment here. I just think it's,
Yeah.
Why not? Why shouldn't we have guns?
But I think that's the thing, America, it's a culture of eccentricities, and there's a much greater tolerance there that, you have autonomy over your own body and your own conscience.
Yeah. I think I was explaining states' rights to my daughter the other day, and why the American system was admirable in that respect, and well, many respects, but that what we're seeing is that, as often happens in America, that different states, it's like a patchwork of experiments being conducted simultaneously by different states. Some have more extreme lockdowns, some have more lax lockdowns, and so on. And which one works best? Which one goes down best with the people? Which one, at the end of say 2 or 3 months, looks to be the wisest decision? And we don't have that. Well, actually, we do to a degree, because you look at Wales and Scotland, and you see that right now they are adopting, for the most ridiculous reasons, but this is fully what one would have expected, they are much more draconian in their interpretation of government policy than England has been.
Yep.
So, for example, you can play golf now in England. You can't play golf in Wales or Scotland. Which strikes me as
and do you know there is a golf course that is
absurd.
half in England and half on Wales? It's right on the border. So I don't know how they're going to solve that. But no, you're right. And that's the theory, right? With federalism, the states are the laboratories of democracy. You and I are interested in cannabis, and like it's a good parallel. You go to the US and you've got all these different states with different systems for the legalization of cannabis. And essentially, the better systems emerge. They're the ones that get the higher tax revenue, where the public health benefits are met. But, you get there because you'll have 10 or 12 different states doing it in a slightly different way. And I think there's something commendable about that.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Now, before I forget, I want you to tell me a bit more about your lockdown breakages. I must tell you my lockdown naughty story, which was that the other day, my wife was talking to a friend of ours, and the friend said, you must come round for a drink sometime, and we said yes, now, this evening, as soon as we can. And I'm not as sociable as you. I'm actually very happy just to sit at home watching Fauda or similar. I don't need to go out anymore. Although I'm missing restaurants right now. I mean, I was never a great restaurateur, but I really want to go to Pied de Terre, for example, to have their lunchtime special. But so when we had this invitation, we accepted with alacrity, and the kids wanted to come as well. The 20-something kids who would normally reject instantly any invitation to go and socialise with their parents' friends, but of course there were people of their age on lockdown as well at the other house. So we found ourselves standing on the lawn having drinks. I mean, what normally would be a absolutely routine behaviour, which has suddenly been rendered illegitimate.
Yep.
But it's extraordinary that, and obviously it added a piquancy to what would have otherwise have been probably quite a humdrum occasion. In fact, it made it really quite exciting. And we felt like rebels against the system and righteously rebellious.
Yeah.
But you must have been having this experience all the time.
Yeah, and it's your stomach goes a bit. I mean, I got a train the other day. I actually went to see a friend, and it was an 8-carriage train, and I think there were about 12 people on the whole train, but just getting on there, it felt quite nerve-wracking, and you'll probably know it, but there's a scene in one series of The Handmaid's Tale where she sort of sneaks onto a train wearing a Martha's uniform, and it felt a bit like that. I just felt like, am I suddenly going to feel the back of my collar being tugged? And, it's sort of... Yeah, there is a sense of that you're doing something you're not supposed to, and it can be quite scary.
Well, the thing a tip in those situations, when you're on the train... and the man in the raincoat says good morning to you in English, do not reply good morning back out of instinctive good manners, because he is in fact a Gestapo officer, and you're going to get captured, and you're going to be one of the 50 people who get shot in The Great Escape.
Yeah, exactly. You can turn it all into sort of a big spy cosplay. But I think I've always been... Yeah, I know. I've always been one of these people that pushes the rules. So, I mean, I go to a lot of theatre. I write about theatre for the Spectator. But I was a punter for 8 years. Yeah, I know. 8 years before I was a critic. And what I used to do is, I would buy the cheapest tickets at the back of the house. 2 tickets, £8 or something. And then 15 minutes before the performance, I'd go on the website and look up which seats were free. And I'd make a note that, D16 and D17 right by the stage. And then I would just go in and sit in those, because you knew that they were free. I've always been... That's a silly example, but I think I've always been...
That's a good example. That's brilliant.
Where there's a chance to kind of take advantage, I generally will. I was in an airport the other day, and I could see that it was very early in the morning. I could see that the lounge wasn't guarded. And I just grabbed my friend by the sleeve, and I was like, good, come on, let's go in there. Let's get a bacon roll. Let's get a Diet Coke. All of this stuff goes to waste anyway, doesn't it? So I've always been someone that kind of looks for those little opportunities to kind of break the rules where it doesn't really affect anyone else that much. If everyone did that theatre system, and now maybe all the Delingpole listeners will, they would clamp down on it. But little things like that. So I've always been one for kind of holding my nerve, but yeah.
I don't think Delingpole listeners would shop you. Actually, I think on the whole they'd probably applaud that and keep it secretly and just maybe do it themselves. But they certainly wouldn't. They wouldn't judge. No, I think your naughtiness sounds more intelligent than my naughtiness, which is basically, if I see a sign saying this path is closed, I will step over the barrier in order to show that I can break the rule. And there was a I got told off once when I lived in London and my children were small. We went to Dulwich Park, and the lakes had frozen over, and there were all these signs telling us that we couldn't go on the lakes and it was dangerous and you'd fall through the ice. So instantly, what I did was I took my little toddlers with me onto the ice, just so that I could defy the authorities and do the wrong thing.
Yeah. But you're a risk taker as well, though, aren't you? You've done stuff that's scary or dangerous.
Yes.
Yeah, because I think this
Yes.
is the other thing. You know, I now see people saying that they don't want to go outside. You know, they're quite happy to live like this until we get a vaccine, which we might never do. Or, you know, they're terrified of sending their kids back to school or anything like this. And I don't know. I was thinking the other day, so before all this kicked off, I spent some time in February in Japan. And when I was there, I was in a restaurant in Tokyo. And they offered me, you know, the blowfish that Homer eats when he nearly dies?
Oh, fugu.
Yeah.
Yes, I want to eat that. Yes.
Yeah, I got
Totally.
offered fugu. Now, I don't even really like fish, but I was like, you know, I have to have this. And of course, there is a 1 million chance or something that you will die. People still die of fugu to this day. You know, it's almost never from a restaurant. It's people that catch it themselves and then try cook it. But I just thought, well, I've got to have this. You know, this will be fun. And I was explaining like my attitude to coronavirus at the moment, that, you know, I'm not particularly worried. I don't want to upset or infect anyone else, but I'm not that worried personally. You know, I would be happy to go on a plane if we had that chance. And my friend just said, well, of course you would. You know, you're the one that ate the fugu. You know, most people don't live like that. They don't. But I don't know. I go back and forth on this, because the other thing I think about is, you know, I've got friends that are quite happy to use Class A drugs. And now they're terrified of the coronavirus. You think, you know, Class A drugs could be contaminated, you don't know what's in them, you have, you know, all of those kind of problems. And they spent most of their 20s doing that, and now they're sort of very worried that if they go out, they'll catch the coronavirus, and they might be the 1 in 10,000 of the 30-year-olds that dies of this thing. But they never used to think, well, I might be the 1 in 1,000 that gets the bad pill and ends up on, you know, in the hospital.
I had an analogous experience this morning where I went riding for the first time in 8 weeks because up until then the rules have dictated, you know, whatever the organisational body that represents riding schools and so on has actually banned them from allowing punters to come in and ride. Anyway, so I went back there today, and there were a few other riders, and one of them was this absolutely. She was just panicking. We were all outside on our horses, about certainly more than 2 meters apart, and she was weaving between us in abject terror, lest she come within the 2 meter zone, inside the danger zone. And she was. I mean, she kind of made the ride rather unpleasant because she was so uptight and terrified. And I was thinking, well, hang on a second. You are participating in probably the most dangerous mainstream sporting activity in the world. I mean, riding kills or maims more people than any other regular activity, doesn't it? I mean, I think you'd have to take up underwater cave diving before you exceeded it on the risk front. And here she was, coming out to ride and yet panicking about this virus, which I wonder what the chances would have been of her contracting coronavirus outdoors when people are wearing gloves, on horses several feet apart and so on. Infinitesimal.
Yeah.
And her chances of dying of it would have been just, you know, she was a young, healthy woman, would have been beyond negligible. And yet here she was panicking nevertheless.
Yeah. And I think how are we going to deal with that? Because these people will end up, their risk averseness will create more risks. Like, did you ever read the Freakonomics book where they talk about how 9/11, the death toll of 9/11, you know, you can add, say, 30% onto it because of the increase in road traffic accidents that would have followed because people stopped flying in America and they drove. And, you know, driving is you're much more likely to have a road traffic accidents than you are to be in a plane crash. So, you know, you get things like that where people will go into this weird state where they're desperate to avoid risks, and they will inadvertently end up creating bigger risks for everyone else and even themselves.
Yeah.
And I just wonder how we're going to deal with this, because I walk around London every day, you know, probably 2 or 3 times a day, and every now and then you'll get one of these people that just darts out the way. Like, they cannot be far enough, you know, far apart from you. And they're scared, and there's no pattern. You know, you can't predict them until you get, not close, but, you know, until you get on the same stretch of pavement. And I just wonder, what do we do about this? Because I was saying to a friend, like, I've got no, you know, I don't want to distress anyone, but I can't assume that everyone wants that level of space. Because I started off basically avoiding elderly people. I thought I will give them a wide berth. And then I thought, well, actually, if I were old, I might find that quite distressing. If all of a sudden no one was near me at all. and I was constantly, So I thought, I think a lot about this, and I was actually thinking, years ago, I've been to like sort of swingers clubs, sex clubs, that kind of thing, and they often have a wristband system where you wear a coloured wristband to communicate to the other people in the club the level of interaction you are comfortable with.
Oh,
Yeah. So my
right.
thinking is
And
maybe.
which band did you have?
Well, I shan't go into any of that, but my thinking is that why don't we have the red wristband system? If you are wearing a red wristband, you are sending a sign that I am either very nervous about the virus, I'm immunocompromised, I live with an elderly relative. Please give me as much space as you can, because I'd be quite happy, to basically to give those minorities of people space. But I just cannot assume, living in the biggest city in the UK, that every single person I pass needs to have the full, 2-4 meters treatment.
Also, Robert, I think that they need to be made to feel slightly like the freaks and outcasts that they are. I
Exactly,
think they
and
need to
wearing the
be,
wristband will help with
you know.
that, right? There's, yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying they should wear a yellow star or anything,
Well,
but I do never, I don't think that, isn't one of the problems at the moment that hysteria, being a COVID bedwetter, has been normalised by the culture, and actually we need to, I mean, before we can rebuild this shattered society we've got, well, shattered economy, more to the point, we need people to understand that no, that your default behaviour should be to interact fairly normally with people and not jump a mile when somebody
exactly.
comes within 2 meters of you.
Yeah. But at the same time, I mean, what if you're someone in your 20s that's been raised by a grandparent and you still, you don't have parents around? I've actually got a friend in this situation, and they live with their one remaining grandparent. You think if I were in his position, I would be really cautious about that because you think you're potentially passing this on to someone that you really, really care about.
Yeah.
I don't have. So that's what I mean with the wristband. That we could have some people that could flag up that extra vulnerability. To use a word that you're going to hate. To the rest of the world, and we could give them that. But because sooner or later we're going to have to get back to normal. We can't keep having these half-mile queues outside supermarkets. And people like I don't mind. I don't mind people being closer to me. Like I'm happy for my space to be sacrificed. But there will be some people out there that need that space, and we need to work that out. We need to be sensible. But the presumption has to be that you are okay with carrying on with something close to normal. We can't assume that everyone is, a bedwetter or overcautious or particularly vulnerable.
That is almost a good ending point, but I just wanted to finally develop one point you made, which is quite interesting, I think, that okay, so you've revealed yourself to be a bit of a naughty risk taker, despite your kind of benign, normal appearance.
Yeah, and my sort of very centrist, banal political opinions. But there you go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and as you know, I'm the same. I mean, I'm fairly obvious about it, and I think all Delingpoles are the same. Actually, if you tell us we can't do something, we'll do it just because that's what we're like. But do you think that's the case with all the people who are? I mean, look at Toby. Thinking about it, Toby, although I call him the cuck all the time, Toby's got a kind of quite a naughty, risky thing. Like the way he bluffed his way into the Vanity Fair party at Hollywood. He's got quite a naughty streak. Thinking about your other friends who did that, are they of a similar ilk?
Yeah, I think so. I think there is just something, and I've been thinking about this recently, how would Hunter S. Thompson deal with this? How would Quentin Crisp deal with this? How would Lord Byron deal with this? Like, where are those those libertines, those radicals? And I think you've got I know lots of adventurous people that have now suddenly become very cautious, but thankfully, I know enough who are still willing to take risks to kind of keep me going for the next few weeks. But it does scare me because I think we seem to have somehow lost that, that kind of naughtiness, that caddishness as a culture.
Because it isn't the scary thing. If we are indeed outliers by dint of our risk-taking personalities and we're not normal, then that means that we've got a whole heap of work to be done to persuade the normies, whatever you want to call them. I mean, maybe that we behave in the way we do. But are you interested in evolutionary biology? evolutionary psychology. Why is it that some of us are born with these apparently innate characteristics which have not been taught to us by our parents, but which just seem to be inbuilt? Why do some of us naturally take risks and some of us don't? And I'm sure it goes back to that stage where, and this would be a minority activity for most of the tribe, because otherwise they get themselves killed. But you need 2 or 3 loons in the tribe to say, that mushroom looks really quite tasty. I wonder whether you can eat that or not. And either they die or they become the hero for discovering a new abundant foodstuff.
Yeah.
And the fact that, well, necessarily, as I've suggested, those people would be a minority, because otherwise if everyone did it, everyone would be dying right, left and centre, wouldn't they? That suggests that we've got some way to go before bringing around the rest of us.
Yeah, but I think as well there's just an element that a lot of people maybe aren't conscious that they are taking risks every day. I think maybe it's just that because this is on the top of every news bulletin, that it's just making people think about it. And I don't know, I think about these kind of things all the time. I think about, is this the right thing to do? Is this the safe thing to do? I mean, one thing that you and I probably got in common, have you go to a country, like I went to China last year. I went on a trip to China. And you think, well, am I, it was a sort of media organised trip. You think, am I lending legitimacy to this regime if I go on this trip? Am I doing this? I don't know. I think a lot about, can I defend this decision? If I died right now, could I defend what I've done to go at the gates with St. Peter or whatever? And I think maybe a lot of people just don't do that. They're not thinking about risk, morality. That's that, and they're happy just to take the diktat from the government. They're happy just to go along with the law.
I'm sure you're right that most people live unexamined lives.
Yeah, and now that's no longer an option.
Yeah.
Unless you want to stay at home all day, which, a lot of them do, unfortunately.
Yes, well, this is my overarching thesis of this entire crisis, that we are we are in the decline phase of our civilization, and we are fat, we are weak, we are incapable of rising to challenges anymore. We deserve to. Our culture deserves to collapse, and that's what we're witnessing. And there's a few of us aghast, we're like sort of people in Rome in when was it, 450, watching the barbarians come through the gates and thinking, God, well, I didn't want this to happen, but we kind of deserved it.
It's a thought.
And on that cheery note, well, Rob, it's been great talking to you.
You
and
too.
Congratulations on your lockdown breakage.
Thank you. And if there are any listeners in the kind of Shoreditch, central London area, they are more than welcome to join me for a lockdown drink.
Or an orgy, by the sounds of it.
Yeah. Great.
Right.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Okay. Bye.
Bye.